As Russia's Ukraine invasion enters day 14, President Zelenskyy of Ukraine has shown major signs of a climb down, the first signs of a climb down since this entire crisis. The Ukrainian president is ready to reach a compromise with Russian forces on the rebel regions as well as NATO. Meanwhile, attacks continue to wreck the cities of Ukraine. I want to go straight across first to Gaurav Sawant, who's with me live. He's on the road outside on the outskirts of Kyiv at this point of time. Gaurav, very, very important day, day 14 of the crisis. President Zelenskyy showing signs of a major climb down, but the siege of Kyiv, or the mission, the objective to see, to take and encircle Kyiv is continuing. What's happening on the ground right now, Gaurav?
Shiv, if I may, people here have heaved a considerable sigh of relief after President Zelenskyy's climb down on not joining or not being on a bent knee to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, because the battle had come extremely close to the capital Kyiv, and the apprehension was that in the next 24 to 48 hours, the Russian army and the Air Force could heavily bombard Kyiv with an aim to enforce a regime change. We've been traveling to some of the areas where conflict has been taking place, but there has been silence even in some of those localities and pockets at a time when Russia has announced a regime of silence, and this regime of silence is being seen as a threat. This is perhaps the last warning being given to non-combatants, to civilians, to leave the battle zone. And this regime of silence has been in multiple locations, from Sumy to Kharkiv,
Yes.
to Kiev, to Karnihiv, and in a way asking people, if you're not involved in this conflict, leave as quickly as possible. The climb down is not just from the president, but also from the ruling dispensation that's saying that we will follow the Budapest Agreement, and Russia is in effect, while Ukraine remains neutral, Russia provides security.
Yes.
And there is no shift towards the North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries, something that the president now seems to be indicating. But what will this lead to, Shiv? Is this too little and too late at a time when the Russian forces are virtually at the gates and may just start a major offensive if the talks in Turkey do not succeed between the foreign ministers of the three countries, Turkey, Ukraine and Russia? Shiv.
Gaurav, where are you headed to right now? Because you and your team have been reporting on the outskirts of Kyiv, where the let-up in shelling has not happened. There is still a great deal of damage being done. Take us through where you're headed. What's the plan right now?
Shiv, we are now heading back to the capital Kyiv. We were in some of these areas near Bucha and Irpin where intense fighting was on. But now there is a lull in the storm. But air raid sirens were going off, Shiv. The worrying aspect for people here is that fighting, or at least the missiles, are now hitting west. So far, the firing was restricted to the north, to the south and the southeast. The three areas from where, the Russian forces were advancing. South Odessa, east, whether it was Kharkiv or it was in the Donbass region.
Yes.
The climb down on Donbass and Crimea is also being seen as an indication that the Ukrainian president does not want this offensive to extend beyond to the areas where it already has. And this perhaps is a last-ditch attempt to save Kiev. Now, we are heading back to Kiev while there were multiple air raid sirens. And you saw that report of mine earlier this morning, that there were air raid sirens, but nothing beyond. But Vinnytsia is a place in the west that was targeted with missiles. You and I, were talking about 8 missiles, one after the other, hitting the airbase there. Now, if this indication is that Russia could expand its operations towards the west, should warlike material, anti-tank guided missiles and surface-to-air missiles continue to come from that direction, that could well be an indication that there will be an all-round encirclement of Kyiv in the days ahead, perhaps prompting this climb down, Shiv.
It's very, very, important to look at both aspects of what's going on right now and being described by Gaurav. A sense of relief sinking in that President Zelenskyy has explicitly said that Ukraine is not pushing for NATO membership. At the same time, an increase in the intensity of the of the actual combat and the conflict on the outskirts of Kyiv. Gaurav has been reporting from those frontline war zones, and they are war zones, make no mistake, because there is a crossfire happening there. There has been shelling happening in those places, and like Gaurav said, Vinnytsia the airport has been completely reduced to rubble. Kharkiv is still under attack. Sumy has seen overnight airstrikes. Chernihiv is seeing residential neighborhoods continue to be bombed. We've seen some tension today in Kherson city. Mykolaiv is also seeing a lot of shelling and rocket attacks. Aircraft are being shot down. So make no mistake, while a claim is being made about NATO by Zelensky and is being seen as a softening of stance, a climb down, perhaps a reality bite. Reality has bitten, the Ukrainian president 14 days after this invasion actually began. But what is it going to mean on the ground in the next few hours, in the next few days, is what matters, because the damage is actually continuing. And Gaurav, that's true, isn't it? On day 14, and I hear that last night was particularly aggressive, with airstrikes in many places, particularly Sumy as well as Kharkiv. Okay, we'll go back to Gaurav. He's on the road, so we may have lost that signal for a moment. We'll get back to him. But this is a huge development, ladies and gentlemen. On 14 days of crisis, after all of those 14 days, Russia claims there has been some progress in dialogue between the two nations. It's a big thing to say on day 14. The Putin administration also says that they are not trying to overthrow the Ukraine government. It's the first peaceful thing that's been said in 14 days. And this comes right in the wake of the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy saying that he is no longer pressing for NATO membership for Ukraine. This is a delicate issue that was one of Russia's stated reasons for invading its pro-Western neighbor. In another apparent nod aimed at placating Moscow that is now snapping at the heels of Kyiv city, Zelenskyy said that he is open to a compromise on the status of two breakaway pro-Russian territories, that is the Donbas region in the east and Crimea on the Black Sea coast, that President Vladimir Putin recognized as independent just before unleashing his invasion on February the 24th. Russia has said it does not want neighboring Ukraine to join NATO under any circumstances, because that has implications for Russia's homeland security. In more recent years, the NATO alliance has expanded further east to take on former Soviet bloc countries, and this has totally infuriated Russia. And that's one of the reasons why it is being seen that NATO is the alliance that has actually triggered this entire conflict. It's not Ukraine as much as NATO itself. Well, President Zelenskyy has addressed his invaders in Russian and called for laying down arms in the war. What he claims Putin has lost, Zelenskyy also said, we need to end this war. We need to return to peace. Zelenskyy, just hours after he said that Ukraine is not pressing for a NATO membership, has sent out a message of peace to Russia saying, we need to end this war. He has spoken in Russian, addressing the Russian audiences and the Russian leadership, saying that we need to end this war. He said we need to return to peace. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy's latest speech coming in, a direct message to the invaders, to Russians, calling for a laying down of arms in the war. He says that this is a war that Russia has lost, still very defiant in his message, but saying we need to end this war, we need to return to peace. Big rolling developments today. Alongside the rocket attacks, the missile attacks and the airstrikes, it looks like the first chance at some semblance of peace is being offered as a possible glimmer of hope. President Zelenskyy in definite climb down mode now. After saying that he is no longer pressing for NATO membership, after saying that he is ready to compromise on the rebel regions of eastern Ukraine, which had been declared independent by Russia before it began its invasion, he has now said Russia and Ukraine need to end this war. We need to return to peace. Does this mean that President Zelenskyy has decided to be practical about what's happening? Has he realized that the West and NATO are not going to come to his aid? Has he realized that Ukraine is, for all practical purposes, alone in this fight against Russia? Has he realized in some manner that he is not going to be able to sustain the large narrative that has been built around how Ukraine will be defended by all these righteous nations in the West against, this invading force? Has the entire narrative of David versus Goliath, has it been quaked by what has basically been 2 weeks of an incessant military operation on his soil? Has this also been triggered by Russia demonstrating a huge capacity to absorb military losses in light of a larger strategic objective? Because it is, after all, a numerically vastly superior military force. Has all of this basically sunk in? Has it finally provided a huge diplomatic, geopolitical reality check for Ukraine after 14 days of being hailed by the world after all the adulation, after all the admiration and praise that President Zelenskyy of Ukraine has come in for? Does this mean that reality has finally bitten? And is Ukraine now suing for peace? Is it suing for peace by saying, we need to return to peace, we need to end this war, we are not pursuing a NATO membership? Is this Ukraine throwing the marauding invaders a bone? Or is this something that could provide the first possible doorstep to a larger peace and an end to this operation? Gaurav, very big developments constantly breaking here. After saying that he doesn't want to pursue that NATO membership and that Ukraine is not pressing for a NATO membership, the latest speech by President Zelenskyy, where he's addressed in Russian and he says, we need to return to peace. We need to lay down our arms and we need to end this war. Gaurav, a message of peace from President Zelenskyy.
Shiv, the message is very clear. The message is very clear that President Putin wants all weapons to be laid down, all arms to be laid down. He's very clear about that, is what we are being told. The regime change is something we are told that the Russians are very clear about. The situation is extremely grim at this point of time here, in the sense that while there is hope that there will be peace if there is no more violence, but there is also the apprehension that if the forces do not lay down arms, President Putin is clear, from what we've been given to believe from reports that are emerging from Russia, that NATO forces, or those who've trained with NATO forces, those who've held NATO weapons, they cannot be the ones that are in charge of security. One of the reports seem to indicate that 60,000 security men or 60,000 armed forces personnel is all that will remain here in Ukraine, and they will be the ones that will be trained by Russia, armed by Russia for the defense of Ukraine, and not with offensive weapons. So just now it remains to be seen what kind of dialogue is carried forward in the days ahead between Ukraine, Russia, and the role that Turkey plays, because Ukraine on the other hand is also seeking the Bayraktar unmanned combat aerial vehicles from Turkey to be able to target the Russian forces. So this is very, very complicated, and yet very the situation is very fluid at this point of time. The weapons and systems that are out on the weapons on the streets, we are told that more than 20,000 assault rifles, additional assault rifles, have been given to the citizens of Ukraine to defend themselves against a Russian attack. And Shiv, you can imagine if citizens and militia have these kinds of weapons, what it would mean for a city that would not have a strong law and order situation in the days and weeks ahead. So the situation does appear very grim, and very fluid, Shiv.
Okay, the situation does appear grim. It does appear very fluid because, Gaurav, right through the day today, we've seen the Ukrainian military, we've seen Ukrainian MPs and citizens, the territorial defense units, basically girding themselves for what is expected to be that, long anticipated final assault on Kyiv. Is there any chance whatsoever, Gaurav, that these sounds of peace that we're hearing from Kyiv right now could in some way either delay or offset or hopefully even put off some kind of a final assault.
Shiv, if I may, so that may be President Zelensky's hope.
Yeah.
That may be Ukraine's hope that if they negotiate and if they have a dialogue, they may stall the inevitable. But given the way the Russian forces appear to be moving forward, given the way that the Chief of General Staff here himself said that the Russian forces are regrouping for a final assault. The information that's coming in from the south, where they feared a big attack in Odessa and movement towards north from Odessa, is an indicator that it would be a multi-pronged offensive where forces from the north may just be the first to strike, and they continue with their airstrikes on Kharkiv, the second largest city. So the indication very clearly is, Shiv, that the offensive may continue, the move forward will continue. The targeting of an airfield in the west is an indicator. Do not think west will be a place which can be used to provide weapons and systems. So they may want to stall this, but will Russia relent, or will Russia insist? Will Russia insist that they want a regime change and complete demilitarization? That would be known in the next 24 to 48 hours. Shiv, we are at a military checkpoint and we will have to keep our cameras down for now.
Yes,
but
Gaurav.
we will talk in just a moment.
We will.
As soon as we are through with this military checkpoint.
Okay,
Shiv.
Gaurav, take care. Take care of yourself and your team. We'll come back to you right after that military checkpost. So Gaurav saying whether or not these sounds of peace that are being sounded by President Zelensky, is it, are his days numbered as president of Ukraine? Because is that what Russia is really after? Regime change. They're not going to trust these words being said by a man who has, shaped himself and projected himself as the biggest bolster against the Russian invasion at this point of time. So this is going to be a disappointment for many in the West. They're going to be like, hey, what's going on here? Why are you suddenly talking about peace? We're with you, etc., etc. So a lot of complicated, contradictory emotions and mixed feelings will be in the Western ecosystem at this point of time. India today, remember, has been relentlessly, meanwhile, getting you all of the images from the beginning of this Russian conflict in Ukraine. Defining image number 1 on day 14, Ukraine troops shot down what they say is another Russian army helicopter in the Mykolaiv region of south-central Ukraine. On your screen, you can see the wrecked parts of what appears to be a Russian attack helicopter, which crashed into this field after being hit by Ukrainian air defense troops. Big defining image number 2. Russia has continued to rain hell on the suburbs of the city Sumy near the Russian border. Horrifying new footage shows the extent of destruction in this particular neighborhood on the outskirts of Sumy after a night of violent Russian shelling that indiscriminately appeared to target residential buildings. You can see several bodies of women and men lying all over this area. This is the same city from which 700 Indian students were pulled out yesterday, and they are on their way to Poland as we speak from the western part of Ukraine. Defining image number 3 on day 14, continuous heavy shelling has destroyed many suburbs of the capital city of Ukraine. Shelled buildings, damaged cars, bodies lying around. Life in these satellite areas of Kyiv have come to a standstill. Big defining image number 4. This is what the evacuation of one of Ukraine's largest suburban areas, Irpin near Kyiv, looks like from a drone. A huge number of people on foot under a destroyed bridge crossing the river. India Today's cameras have been able to capture this exodus from the ground. Artillery and airstrikes have caused heavy damage in and around the city of Irpin, 22 kilometers from Kyiv. Big defining image number 6. As Russia continues to attack key Ukrainian cities, 150 orphan children, mostly infants and toddlers from Lviv, have arrived in Poland over the last 48 hours. Volunteers and police officers have been seen giving soft toys to the children as they were carried from the station and loaded onto buses, staring at an uncertain future in foster care.
It's going to take a while because there's lots of small kids, lots of breaks.
Defining image number 7 on day 14. On your screens, pictures of a demonstrator being brutally thrashed during an anti-war protest in Russia's St. Petersburg. The man was hit several times by Russian police. Russia has detained over 4,000 citizens for participating in anti-war rallies. It's a country that has criminalized the use of the word invasion to describe the military operation by Russia in Ukraine at this time. Defining image number 8 on day 14 as Ukraine fiercely continues to battle Russian forces. This image shows Ukrainian servicemen inspecting a charred Russian tank in the Sumy city of northern Ukraine.
Hello and welcome to an India Today special broadcast that comes to you from the strife-torn Ukrainian capital Kyiv. I'm Gaurav Sawant. The situation in Kyiv does remain extremely tense. There was shelling that was reported in multiple parts of this country. We'll tell you about that in greater detail during the course of the hour and the day. But for now, we will concentrate on air power and the effective use of air power and air defense. Russia's attempts to have total air supremacy and Ukraine's efforts and heroic efforts in places to ensure that Russia does not enjoy that air supremacy, denying the use of air power or at least checking it as much as possible. Over the course of the next half hour, India Today's team of reporters here in Ukraine and our producers in Delhi will get you all the details on this very crucial aspect. But that big story that's coming up is the United States rejecting Poland's offer of the MiG-29 air superiority fighters. I quickly now want to cut across to India Today's executive editor Shiv Arur, joining us for more on this big story. And Shiv explains why Poland's offer was untenable, as the US put it, and why Poland has been let down for the second time.
The Ukrainians, including President Zelenskyy, have said that we need a no-fly zone, or plan B is we need fighter aircraft that our pilots can fly, if not yours, and therefore please give them to us as quickly as possible. Poland has said that we'll give you these fighters and we will send them to Germany. We won't send them to Poland, but we will send them to Germany, to the Ramstein air base. It says it's up to, they've put it in the US hands. They've said we'll send these jets there. It's up to the US to send the jets to Ukraine. So there's that caveat also. The US says the jet offer is untenable. You're sending them to us and we'll have to send them, so one of the NATO countries will be seen as indulging in an act of war against Russia. The US is unwilling to get drawn into this war. President Biden has already made that very clear. But the US wants these NATO countries, ki aap bhej do bhaiya, you send your jets to Ukraine and help them out, but we will not play a part in it. This is being seen, the reason why we're saying this is shambolic is because this is the second big betrayal after NATO has said that we will not accede to this request from NATO saying please impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Now the Western jet stunt this is how it's playing out in Europe. That is Warsaw. That is the capital of Poland. That's the country in which all these MiG-29 fighters are. The reason why MiG-29 fighters are important is because Ukraine also flies MiG-29 fighters. So it's being seen as a commonality, a common platform that their pilots can fly with very little, conversion training. They want to send it from Warsaw to Ramstein, which is in Germany. Germany doesn't have a border with Ukraine. Poland does. In Ramstein, the plan, the sort of skeletal plan is Ukrainian pilots can go there, train on those aircraft, and they'll fly those aircraft to Ukraine, because Germany certainly doesn't want to have any part of it. The Pentagon says we cannot send Polish jets to Ukraine. We will not do that from Ramstein because that is something that impacts the entire NATO alliance. So it's a bit of a mess. You've got the West looking actually quite silly right now because there's already a sense of betrayal in Ukraine right now. Now they're playing Chinese checkers with their jets as part of the NATO alliance, but not actually substantively sending any forces into Ukraine. It is understandable why they don't want to do that, but these little moves between Poland and Germany and NATO and the US just shows that there is no plan in place.
Today is day 14 of that war. Day 14 of the war, the air defense assets, the surface-to-air missiles, the surface-to-air batteries, they remain intact, at least in some portions. The Russian forces, from day one, have systematically targeted 14 airfields, and those airfields continue to be targeted even till late yesterday. Vinnytsia was targeted yesterday, Kharkiv was targeted, Kherson was targeted. Airfields are being targeted across Ukraine. There was a report that Borispil airfield, which is a civilian airfield, that too was targeted by rockets late yesterday. But Ukraine continues to strike and strike at Russian aircraft, and these include Su-35s fighter bombers, these include Su-27s, these include Su-30s. That is what Ukraine has claimed, that they have downed close to 100 fighter jets, attack helicopters and transport helicopters of the Russian armed forces. We bring you this report.
Russia fiercely escalates airstrikes on Ukraine. It is using its fighter jets to hit key Ukrainian cities. In the last 72 hours, Putin has unleashed the fury of Russia's hellbirds on Kyiv and Kharkiv. Ukraine claims to have shot down a Sukhoi Su-34 fighter bomber in Kharkiv on Monday. They have released images of the debris of a Russian plane, completely destroyed and demolished. Ukraine also claims it has shot down more than 7 Russian war machines in the last 3 days, including jets and Mi-35 choppers. Ukrainian authorities have shared several images of pilots who they claim are Russians now in their custody.
Мимо помилилось.
Не, это ясно.
У тебя слетное задание было, где карта? Вот это.
Russia is using its formidable air superiority to control Ukraine's skies. The most visible Russian aircraft in the Ukraine war is the Sukhoi Su-25, a tough Soviet-era bird that's taken on most attack duties. The Mi-24 is also being used by the Russian forces. They are sturdy, heavily armed, and used to support ground troops. The third Russian aircraft seen in the skies over Ukraine is the Sukhoi Su-34, a supersonic medium-range fighter bomber used for tactical strikes. Su-34 have been in eastern and northern Ukraine. Another Russian attack helicopter on combat duty is the Kamau Ka-52. These images of one such helicopter made to force land went viral during the early days of the invasion. Several more are said to be flying sorties on the northern border. The images coming from Ukraine show Russia's plans are striking deeper inside Ukraine than earlier believed. These airstrikes could be the prelude to the real battle for Kyiv. Bureau Report, India Today.
One of the most dramatic images in this war is the shooting down of a Mi-35 attack helicopter using a Stinger surface-to-air missile. And that image went viral worldwide. That image is being studied very closely by aviation experts and analysts in attack and defense mechanisms. Take a look at this report that went viral globally.
Perhaps the most dramatic footage in 10 days of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Cameras from a drone capturing a low-flying Russian Mi-35 attack helicopter falling prey to a Ukrainian Stinger missile. The chopper, flying at low altitude, to avoid radars, to avoid eyes, meets a devastating end. The Stinger missile, supplied by NATO with infrared homing systems, hitting the helicopter with deadly accuracy. Both Germany and the United States have been pumping in large numbers of Stinger missiles to the Ukrainian military over the last few weeks, in order to challenge and shoot down Russian air power. The missile proving its worth in this video, the first of its kind released by the Ukrainian government. Reported to be on the outskirts of capital Kyiv, showing the heavily armed military helicopter of the Russian armed forces ending in a massive fireball and a plume of smoke. A rapid and fiery end to an attack helicopter crew that could well have been on an attack mission.
This Mi-35 helicopter, and when you look at these images, it's a young soldier who's actually running behind that helicopter, aims with his surface-to-air man-portable Stinger missile, fires and forgets, and it goes and hits the target. It goes and hits the attack helicopter, and the attack helicopter comes crashing down. This shows how a Stinger can easily bring down a low-flying fighter plane. It can bring down a helicopter.
As Russian troops advance into several parts of Ukraine and encircle cities, images of the Ukrainian residents have been flooding social media. This time, a Russian jet apparently being shot down in the northern city of Chernihiv, captured on camera by local residents while they cheered as the jet was brought down. It was later reported that the Russian pilot of the jet had been captured alive, while his co-pilot didn't survive. Another Russian plane was shot down in the city of Mykolaiv. A dramatic video of the plane's pilot being interrogated by Ukrainian forces has also surfaced.
Какой часть? 69-88, Откуда сам родом?
Прям родился, родом?
Да.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy claims in a televised address Ukraine has captured, wounded and killed over 10,000 Russian soldiers since the start of the invasion.
НАТО. Слабкий саміт.
Almost 10,000 Russian soldiers killed. 10,000. This is dreadful.
Для Європи метою номер один.
There's plenty of fighting. Airstrikes are basically an everyday occurrence all over Ukraine. Again, that's what Ukraine repeats its demand to close off the sky for the Russians. Russians are using those planes to hit civilian targets, pedestrian districts. Reality is this is a battle that is raging all over Ukraine, and Russia are using their air power advantage to push at the civilians like in no time since the Second World War.
President Putin, meanwhile, has blamed the United Kingdom for triggering the military conflict. Can Ukraine successfully resist the overwhelming and intensifying scale of the invading force? With Gaurav Sawant and Rajesh Pawar in Kyiv, Bureau Report, India Today.
India Today's Shiv Arur gets us more details on how Russia is deploying its air power and how Ukraine is denying the use of skies, or at least attempting to, even on day 14.
Heart-stopping images of a Russian airstrike caught on camera. The first footage of an actual aerial bombing in 11 days of a conflict that's been represented largely by ground attacks. But only an hour after the bombing of Irpin went out on India Today, this stunning 32-second clip capturing a Russian attack helicopter being shot down by a Ukrainian shoulder-fired missile exploded from the battlefield north of Kyiv. In the last 48 hours, the air power aspect has taken on a fearsome new primacy, with aircraft much more visible and claims of Russian pilots taken captive. Both Ukraine and Russia have been old Soviet aviation powerhouses, and the war has generated enormous interest in the warbirds both countries have deployed over their blazing battlefields. The most visible Russian aircraft in the Ukraine crisis is the Sukhoi Su-25, a tough old Soviet-era bird that's taken on most attack duties.
Let me show you what these aircraft are that are doing the bombing and that the Ukrainians claim that they've actually shot down. These are strikes very close to Kyiv. The jet dropping the bombs is called a Sukhoi 25. It's a Sukhoi Su-25. It's a ground strike aircraft. It is designed for close air support to ground forces, and there are huge ground forces of the Russian army that's, outside on the outskirts of Kyiv right now. These aircraft are designed and capable of low-altitude bombings. That's why you saw them captured so clearly on mobile camera. Their weapons include strike missiles, bombs, rockets. They've so far been used in many, many different operations around the world, including and most notably in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, and Sudan, but of course in many other operations, including in North Africa as well.
The most visible Russian helicopter in the war is the Mi-24. Seen here being dramatically shot down by a Ukrainian shoulder-fired missile. These are sturdy, heavily armed and armored helicopters deployed to support ground troops and destroy tanks and other ground targets. The Mi-24's export variant, the Mi-35, is in service with the Indian Air Force too. The third Russian aircraft type seen in the skies over Ukraine is the Sukhoi Su-34, a supersonic medium-range fighter bomber used for tactical strikes in contested airspace. Su-34s have been seen in the air over eastern and north Ukraine. The other Russian attack helicopter on combat duties in Ukraine is the Kamov Ka-52. These images of one such helicopter made to force land went viral in the early days of the invasion. Several more are set to be flying sorties in the northern border. Also clearly visible in the skies over Ukraine are Russian Mi-8 utility helicopters captured here in this airborne assault on the Hostomel air base north of Kyiv in the early days of the invasion. These workhorse helicopters are a precursor to the Mi-17 that India currently operates. Ukraine has made the huge claim that its air defense systems have shot down 2 giant Il-76 transport jets, though there has been no visual proof of this. While the iconic Russian Tu-95 hasn't been seen in the skies over Ukraine or even nearby, the high-flying propeller-driven aircraft has figured in the war of claims between both sides, with Ukraine saying its air defense forces have managed to shoot down one of these giant airplanes. As air power becomes more pronounced in Ukraine, and as NATO continues to refuse Ukraine's plea for the imposition of a no-fly zone, could airstrikes define the second week of Putin's invasion? With Rajesh Pawar in Irpin and Gaurav Sawant and Geeta Mohan in Kyiv, Bureau Report, India Today.
This war between Russia and Ukraine is also a litmus test for the massive Russian arsenal, its weapons and systems, and their might globally. Do keep in mind, India extensively uses Russian equipment, be it the Su-30 MKIs, of course that's an Indian version of the Su-30 fighter jets, the MiG-29s, the attack helicopters, the transport helicopters, Mi-35, Mi-24, the Mi-17s, the Mi-8s. India extensively uses Russian aircraft. This war truly is a test for those Russian systems, including air defense systems. Take a look at this report.
As the Russia-Ukraine crisis escalates and as the shockwaves are felt all around the world, one of those shockwaves is definitely here in India as well. It's a good time to remember that the Indian military happens to be one of the largest users of Soviet-era and Russian weaponry and military hardware. And that's one of the reasons why, amidst everything that's happening with all the unpredictability between Russia and Ukraine, the Indian Ministry of Defense has held a high-level meeting to assess the possible aftermath, the possible risk to India's arsenals as a result of this war between Russia and Ukraine. Russian equipment dominates every aspect of India's war-fighting arsenal across the three services. Let's start with the Indian Air Force. The newest equipment is the S-400 Triumph air defense missile system. Then you've got a huge fleet of Su-30 MKI fighters. Then there are the MiG-29, the upgraded MiG-29 fighters, which are a mainstay in the Indian Air Force. Then you've got the old MiG-21 fighter jets. They've got a controversial reputation, but continue to operate in large numbers. One of the biggest aircraft operated by the Indian Air Force is also of Russian origin, the Ilyushin IL-76 fleet and the similar IL-78, which is India's mid-air refueling tanker fleet. Then you've got the IL-76 Falcon airborne warning and control system aircraft, which are based in Agra. Utility helicopters are also Russian. The Mi-17 helicopters, very visible, very iconic. They're the mainstay, the backbone of India's medium-lift helicopter fleet. Then you've got Mi-35 heavy assault helicopters, also of Russian origin, operated by India. The Mi-26 heavy lift helicopters, the biggest helicopters in the world, also in Indian service, are from Russia. The BrahMos cruise missile is an Indo-Russian joint venture. Much of the technology is from Russia.
Day 14 of this conflict, and India Today's team, camera person Pawan Kumar, India Today's Foreign Affairs editor Geeta Mohan and I will continue to report from Ground Zero. But that is all we have time for on this India Today special broadcast from Ukraine. Many thanks for watching.